A bomb, counting down its final seconds. Everything was happening exactly as planned.
Mayday, Mayday, ATC. This is Flight 434. There's been an explosion on board. Requesting an emergency landing in Naha.
Behind it all was a terrorist organization, with a plan to massacre thousands of innocent people. The same group that would later be linked to the 9/11 tragedy. And this time, their target was Philippine Airlines Flight 434. December 11, 1994, Manila, 3 a.m. Inside a small room in the slums, a thin man was quietly finishing his work. Behind that calm appearance was a member of Al-Qaeda. Ramzi Youssef, 27 years old, born in Pakistan, a former electrical engineering student in the United Kingdom, trained in terrorist camps across South Asia and the Middle East. He and his accomplices were building bombs for a project called Bojinka, a global conspiracy with 3 chilling phases. First, assassinate Pope John Paul II during his visit to the Philippines. Second, blow up 11 airliners flying from Asia to the United States, killing nearly 4,000 people in midair. And finally, crash a jet into the CIA headquarters in Virginia. In 1993, just a year before this event, the same terrorist group had already struck once, the World Trade Center bombing in New York. 6 people were killed, thousands were injured. It was a warning to the world. And this time, they had chosen Philippine Airlines Flight 434 as a test run for the next wave of terror. The timer had gone off. It was time for Ramzi Youssef to set out and carry out his crime. 5:10 a.m., Ninoy Aquino International Airport. From very early in the morning, many passengers had already arrived to check in for their flights. With a complex background and a backpack full of deadly weapons, how did this terrorist manage to board the plane? Through cunning deception, he easily slipped past customs using a passport under a fake name, Armaldo Forlani, a misspelled version of a name he had randomly read in a newspaper. As for the bomb, Ramzi Youssef had disassembled it and cleverly hidden its components in different places. The nitroglycerin, the main ingredient in gunpowder, was concealed inside a contact lens cleaning solution bottle. The battery and wiring system were hidden beneath the heels of his shoes, at a level that the metal detectors of that time could hardly detect. Finally, with his experience in illegal entry and evasion, he successfully passed through security checks and boarded the plane without raising suspicion. The first leg of the journey lasted a little over an hour, from Manila to Cebu, before continuing on to Japan. The flight was operated by a Boeing 747-200, a large and widely used passenger aircraft of its era. The captain, Eduardo Reyes, was a 58-year-old veteran pilot with 6 years of experience in the Philippine Air Force. The first officer, Jamie Herrera, was 46, and the flight engineer, Dexter Comendador, a young man, was also a former Air Force pilot. At exactly 5:35 a.m., the plane received clearance to take off. About 10 minutes later, when the Boeing had reached stable flight, Youssef took advantage of the moment while passengers were having breakfast and carried a small personal bag into the lavatory. He had at most 2 minutes. Every movement was executed skillfully. Each tool was taken out. The Casio digital watch and 2 9-volt batteries were removed from his wrist to serve as the timer. Then he assembled the components, completing a fully functional bomb. Youssef set the timer for the bomb to go off 4 hours later, and returned to his seat. Everything was according to his calculation. The flight was not crowded. There were still many empty seats, including the one he had pre-selected, seat 26K. According to the information he had gathered, directly beneath seat 26K was the plane's fuel tank. When the bomb detonated, the fire would ignite the fuel and cause an in-flight explosion, killing hundreds. Citing a personal reason, Youssef requested a seat change, which was promptly approved without anyone suspecting. He secretly hid the bomb in his life jacket pouch, then left the plane when it stopped in Cebu. 6:50 a.m. Mactan Cebu Airport. The chief flight attendant announced the transit point and invited passengers to prepare for the next leg to Tokyo. That was all he needed. The terrorist blended into the crowd, leaving the plane quietly and without leaving any trace. On the second leg of the flight, there were a total of 273 passengers, most of them Japanese citizens returning home. A new cabin crew had been brought on board, bringing the total flight crew to 20 people. Due to congestion, the flight was delayed by nearly 40 minutes. It was not until 8:38 a.m. that the Boeing 747-200 finally took off. Seat 26K now had a new occupant, Haruki Ikegami, 24. An industrial aircraft production engineer from Japan, he was eager to return home after a long work assignment. More than 3 hours later, at 11:43 a.m. local time, when the plane was flying steadily at an altitude of 10,000 meters over Minami Island in southern Japan, the countdown clock reached its final second. 11 hours 43 minutes and 7 seconds. A terrifying explosion tore through the fuselage. Smoke flooded the passenger cabin. Screams echoed everywhere. Chaos erupted. The chief flight attendant Fernando hurried to the scene of the blast. There, Haruki Ikegami was unconscious. The lower half of his body had been severed and had fallen into the hole directly beneath his seat. When they pulled him up, he was already dead. A large hole had been blown in the cabin floor. Around it, more than 10 passengers were wounded, including one woman who was critically injured. To prevent panic, Fernando stayed calm. He put on his oxygen mask and covered Ikegami with a blanket, as if he were still alive, helping to keep the other passengers composed. Fortunately, the blast's force was not as great as it could have been. Yusuf's perfect plan had failed. Normally, the center fuel tank of a Boeing 747-200 sits directly beneath C-26K. But on this particular aircraft, after several structural modifications, that location had been replaced by a cargo compartment. Even more crucially, the bomb had been placed at the wrong angle, instead of pointing horizontally. It was aimed upward. That caused the explosion to vent vertically, most of the force being absorbed by Ikegami's body and preventing the fuselage from being torn apart. Once things were temporarily stabilized, the chief flight attendant immediately radioed the cockpit.
"Captain, there's been an explosion in the cabin. 1 person dead, more than 10 injured."
The blast threw the aircraft, causing it to lurch and bank sharply to the right. Fortunately, the autopilot was engaged, allowing the plane to regain balance in time. But that fragile calm could not last long. Captain Eduardo Reyes immediately instructed flight engineer Dexter Comendador to head into the passenger cabin and check what was happening. Comendador quickly noticed the cabin pressure dropping, warning lights flashing, and he reacted instantly. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Captain Reyes radioed air traffic control, declaring an emergency and requesting an immediate diversion to Naha Airport in Okinawa, roughly 70 kilometers away. It was pure luck. Had the flight departed on time, it would have already been flying over the vast Pacific Ocean, and no one would have made it out alive.
Mayday, ATC. This is Flight 434. We're at flight level 330. There's been an explosion on board. We have casualties. Requesting an emergency landing in Naha.
But the radio transmission was unstable. Reyes repeated the call several times, yet no reply came through. Moments later, a U.S. military radar station in Okinawa picked up the signal and stepped in to help.
434, this is Okinawa Control. We have your signal. Switch to frequency 125.8. We'll guide you down to Naha.
A U.S. Air Force Learjet was dispatched to escort the stricken aircraft, assess the damage to the fuselage, and confirm whether the landing gear was functional. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reyes calmly addressed the passengers.
"Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making an emergency landing at Naha.
Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. Some passengers prayed. Others scribbled what might be their final words to loved ones. The cabin was filled with tension, silence broken only by muffled sobs and the hum of the engines. Then, just when safety seemed within reach, disaster struck again. The autopilot malfunctioned, sending the aircraft flying past Okinawa without descending. Reyes immediately disengaged the system and handed manual control to the first officer. It was risky, but it was their only chance. Thankfully, the aircraft stayed level. But another problem emerged. The flight controls weren't responding. Keeping their composure, the crew decided to use asymmetric thrust, a maneuver where the engines on each side are powered unevenly to steer the plane. They increased thrust on the left engine and reduced it on the right, gradually turning the massive jet back toward Naha. The captain also slowed the aircraft, began descending, and dumped fuel to lighten the load.
Emergency 434, requesting immediate medical response upon landing.
After nearly an hour of intense struggle, the crew finally brought the Boeing 747 down safely at 12:45 p.m., exactly 1 hour after the explosion. Applause erupted. Passengers embraced each other, tears streaming down their faces. All 272 passengers and 20 crew members survived. Only one fatality was recorded. The media would later call it the miracle of Naha. At the scene, Okinawan police collected fragments and crucial pieces of evidence. From the remnants of a timer, investigators determined that the bomb had been planted during the flight segment from Manila. Around the same time, Manila police received intelligence reports about a group of Middle Eastern suspects who had entered the country illegally. After weeks of investigation, on January 7, 1995, while Yusuf and his accomplices were assembling explosives in a small apartment in the slums, a sudden chemical fire broke out, unintentionally exposing their operation. Philippine police stormed the hideout, but Yusuf managed to escape. However, officers recovered a computer, maps, and 12 fake passports, revealing an entire terrorist conspiracy known as the Bojinka plot. A month later, Ramzi Yusuf was captured in Pakistan and extradited to the United States. The New York Supreme Court sentenced him to life imprisonment plus 240 years. His accomplice, Abdul Hakim Murad, received a similar sentence. Thanks to their composure and outstanding skill, the crew of Flight 434 were awarded the Medal of Honor by the President of the Philippines, a symbol of courage and devotion in one of the rarest aviation disasters in history. The explosion aboard Flight 434 was not only a grim warning to the world about the growing threat of terrorism everywhere, but also a testament to the bravery, determination, and steel resolve of those inside the cockpit. Had it not been for the calm and decisive actions of Captain Eduardo Reyes and his crew, 273 souls might have become nothing more than a statistic, another tragedy in aviation history. The world would soon understand, evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces. But human courage and spirit, when tested, remain the strongest shield against it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to support the channel.